O Captain, My Captain by Walt Whitman. An exact contemporary of Herman Melville, Walt Whitman's contribution to the enrichment of American literature is worth $1 million. He was born on May 31st, 1819 in Long Island, New York, and was brought up partly in Brooklyn. In 1823, when he was 5 years old, his father moved to Brooklyn, where Whitman attended public school. At the age of 11, he left school to work as an office boy in a law office and then as a typesetter's apprentice at a number of print shops. Although his family moved back to Long Island in 1834, Whitman stayed in Brooklyn and then in New York City to become a compositor. Unable to find work, he rejoined his family on Long Island in 1836 and taught at several schools. In addition to teaching, Whitman started his own newspaper, The Long Islander. He subsequently edited numerous papers for short periods over the next 14 years and published poems and short stories in various periodicals. He established his reputation as a poet in the late 1850s to early 1860s with the release of Leaves of Grass in 1855. The brief volume was not, to begin with, a bestseller. Whitman's work received significant attention following praise for Leaves of Grass by American transcendentalist, lecturer and essayist Ralph Waldo Emerson. During the American Civil War, he tended wounded soldiers in army hospitals in Washington, D.C. The war and the great devastation and his intimate association with the wounded provided new material for him to pour out in his poems published under the title Drum Taps in 1865. On the death of Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of America, Whitman wrote 4 poems to commemorate the great leader. The poems are O Captain, My Captain, When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, Hushed be the Camps Today, and This Dust Was Once the Man. Following the war, he suffered a paralytic stroke in 1873 and produced little significant work following his stroke. He died in Camden, New Jersey at age 72 on March 26, 1892. The historical context of the poem. The poem was written in the immediate aftermath of the American Civil War. It was the 4-year conflict between the northern and the southern states. After decades of tension over the issues of slavery and the rights of states, 11 southern states declared independence from the Union in the early 1860s. The war exacted an enormous death toll, and Civil War battles remain some of the bloodiest days in American history. Finally, at the end of a long and grinding struggle that left the Union victorious, President Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth in 1865. Introduction to the poem. The poem, O Captain, My Captain, is an elegy written in 1865. It was written to honor Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, whom Whitman admired the most. The poem was first published in the New York Saturday Press in November 1865 and was later included along with When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed in a group of poems titled Sequel to Drum Taps in 1865. When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed became one of Whitman's most critically acclaimed poems, but O Captain, My Captain, with more conventional rhyme and meter, was by far the most popular of Whitman's poems during his lifetime. Analysis of stanza 1. Some of the beautiful expressions of Whitman's feelings about Lincoln is best seen in his magnificent elegy. In his poem, O Captain, My Captain, Whitman expresses his profound grief at the tragic end of a leader who held the nation together through the worst crisis in the history. The whole poem is an extended metaphor. Now, what is an extended metaphor? The term extended metaphor refers to a comparison between two unlike things that continues throughout a series of lines in a poem or of sentences in a paragraph. The poet takes a single metaphor and builds the whole poem on it, using various subjects, images, ideas, and situations. The captain in the poem refers to Abraham Lincoln, who is the commander during the Civil War. The ship represents the United States of America. Using this rhetorical technique of an extended metaphor, the poet at once celebrates the safe and successful return of their ship and mourns the loss of its great leader. Here, we can see that the poet presents the paradox involved in the president's dying in the hour of victory. The poem starts with the tone of triumph and jubilation after the fearful trip, namely the end of the Civil War. The ship has braved all the storm of war and has achieved its aim, that is, the end of slavery. The bell is ringing and there is celebration all around. Yet, in the midst of the celebration, the poet remembers the grimness of the ship and the darker side of the war. Though the war is won, but his heart aches for the people who lost their lives. The poet's heart fills with immeasurable sadness on realizing that his captain, his idol, is dead. The repetition of heart, heart, heart in the first stanza communicates the poet's dismay and horror at realizing that his captain has died. The bleeding drops of red refers to both the captain's bleeding wounds and the speaker's wounded heart. In the second stanza, the poet desperately calls his captain to rise up and hear the bells and join in the celebration of the victory in war. He asks his captain to rise and see that the people are flying flags, blowing their trumpets and waiting to present him bouquets. The bells referred to in the second stanza are probably the bells rung in celebration of military victory, or perhaps the bells might also symbolize funeral bells tolled in mourning. Similarly, bouquets and wreaths are also common to both celebratory receptions and funerals. The crowd that has gathered on the shore reminds us that the speaker of the poem is not alone in lamenting his captain's death, but rather shares this experience with the masses. The captain of the state accomplished a lot during his lifetime: the abolition of slavery, the formation of the Union, and the coming together of the people. The poet is not ready to acknowledge that his captain, the father of the nation, is dead. He laments that his captain, who led his crew bravely to victory, will not receive the fanfare that is his just due. But in the third stanza, the poet faces the reality and accepts the captain's death. The details and images evoked in these lines all serve to reiterate that the captain is dead. His lips are pale and still. Then again the poet says, "My father does not feel my arm. He has no pulse nor will." However, the line "Exulto shores and ringo bells" is explicitly a call for rejoicing. The speaker himself will not celebrate, but will walk with mournful tread, as he says. Whitman encourages the people to keep on celebrating and rejoicing, but for the poet it is a personal loss of his idol, so he walks with mournful steps. The poet uses various literary devices to bring home his idea. The poem is an extended metaphor. I have already dealt with this extended metaphor in my discussion of the first stanza. The poet uses captain for Abraham Lincoln, the commander during the Civil War, and the ship is used for the United States of America. Apostrophe, the poem opens with a repeated apostrophe, "O Captain, my Captain." We come to know that the poem is addressed to Abraham Lincoln. Whitman uses repetition and rhythm to give the poem an elegiac tone. In the first stanza, the repetition of the word heart shows the poet's grief and heartache against the backdrop of the victory. The poet uses refrain, "O Captain, my Captain," to stress upon the sense of loss. Then again, the last line of each stanza closes with the refrain, "Fallen cold and dead." It lends a sense of finality to the poem and leaves no doubt in the reader's mind that the captain is dead. Alliteration is used in the second stanza, "For you, flag is flung," and in the third stanza, "safe and sound." Personification can be seen in line, "Exult, O shores," in the third stanza. Then the poet's use of concrete visual descriptive imagery like cold and dead, lips are pale and still, and bleeding drops of red visually present the story to the reader's eyes. The recurrence of similar sounding consonants in close proximity, especially in "flag is flung," is a fine example of consonance. "O Captain, my Captain" is the only Walt Whitman poem that has a regular meter and rhyme scheme. Often hailed as the father of free verse, Whitman tended to write his poems without following any kind of ordered poetic form. However, this poem is organized into 3 8-line stanzas, each with an AA, BB, CD, ED rhyme scheme. The first 4 lines are made up of 2 rhyming couplets, so the rhyme scheme follows a regular pattern of AA, BB. You must have observed that the first 4 lines of each stanza are longer than the last 4 lines. Because this poem is an elegy to the dead, the more traditional format adds to its solemnity. Additionally, the regular meter is reminiscent of a soldier marching across the battlefield, which is fitting for a poem that commemorates the end of the Civil War. Themes of the poem: victory and loss, grief and isolation. In this poem, we find the speaker torn between relief and despair. The theme of grief and isolation is intertwined with the theme of victory and loss. The poet very carefully captures America's confusion at the end of the Civil War. It was a time of many conflicting sentiments, and Whitman immortalizes this sense of uncertainty in "O Captain, my Captain." The poem begins with the description of the celebration of victory in war. The poet talks of the people eagerly waiting at the shore as they are happy for the victory. They arranged many things to welcome the warriors, like the bells, the rings, and the flag. But the most ironic part is that while everyone is celebrating for the victory of the captain himself was not alive to see the triumph. The poem thus foregrounds the tension between the outward, emotional expression of the poet and the poet's internal emotional experiences. The speaker must reconcile his personal grief for the president with the grief and joy of the nation, and this is the wider aspect. Through these tensions, Whitman suggests that the deep grief for a loved one can be an isolating force that makes loss even more painful than it might otherwise be. The next theme is loyalty. Another startling aspect of this poem is that the speaker shows such commitment to his fallen leader, referring to him as my captain and even my father. The poem is a fine tribute to President Lincoln, a man whom Whitman has never met, even once in his life, but admired during his lifetime. This poem shows more fierce loyalty than could even be expected from actual ship's crews or even actual sons. Thank you and have a nice day.